You wake up on the ground. Not a mattress, not a sleeping pad. The actual ground. Hard-packed dirt. Maybe a thin layer of grass. The roots of a tree pressing into your ribs. It is not yet light. Something moved outside. You don't know what. And you're already behind. This is day one. You haven't even stood up yet. For roughly 95% of human history, this was the only life your ancestors knew. No agriculture. No stored food. No walls. No running water. Just a landscape, your body, and a small group of people you depended on completely. Anthropologist James Suzman, who spent decades living with the hoansi people of the Kalahari Desert in southern Africa, described their world as one of radical presence. Every single day demanded something your modern body and mind are no longer trained to give. So let's be honest about what that something actually is. Your first problem is water. Within 24 hours of beginning this life, you will need to find clean water. Not bottled, not filtered. Water you located yourself, remembered the location of, and have the physical ability to reach. Hunter-gatherer groups across Africa, Australia, and South America all maintain detailed mental maps of water sources across hundreds of square miles. The hoansi could identify over 500 plant species in their territory by name, and roughly 150 of those had practical uses, including which roots held water underground during dry seasons. This was not written down anywhere. It lived inside their heads, passed from grandparent to child over years of careful watching. You don't have that map. You never learned it. By the second day, your feet are the real problem. Modern humans walk an average of 3,000 to 5,000 steps per day. Hunter-gatherer groups studied by researcher Herman Pontzer at Duke University logged between 17,000 and 19,000 steps, consistently, across seasons, regardless of age. Not on paved sidewalks, on terrain. Uneven root-crossed, sometimes thorned terrain, often barefoot or in minimal footwear made from hide. Your ankles, your arches, the tendons along the backs of your heels. None of these structures are conditioned for this. Pontzer's work, published in 2012 through the PLOS One journal, found that despite this level of activity, hunter-gatherer groups showed remarkably low rates of metabolic disease, but they had built that capacity over a lifetime. You have not. By day 2, blisters. By day 3, possibly a twisted ankle on a route you didn't see. Now we're in real trouble. Because here is something the movies never tell you about hunter-gatherer life. It is radically social. You do not survive this life alone. Anthropologist Wiessner, whose decades of fieldwork with the hoansi produced landmark research on social bonding and gift exchange, documented how meat from a successful hunt was distributed according to a complex set of social obligations, not randomly, not based on who was strongest, but according to relationships, kinship, reciprocity, mutual aid. If you were new to this group, a stranger, inexperienced, with no established relationships, you would receive the lowest share of resources. You would be watched carefully. Trust would have to be earned through demonstrated usefulness. And usefulness meant knowing things, reading animal tracks, knowing which plants cause vomiting and which ones cured it, understanding weather by cloud shape and wind direction, recognizing the specific calls of specific birds that indicated specific predators were close. You know none of this yet. You are, in practical terms, a liability. Let's reconstruct what day 3 actually looks like. The group wakes before dawn, as they do every day because the coolest hours are for walking. Your legs are already aching from the day before. Someone in the group, probably an older woman, because in most documented hunter-gatherer societies, women over 40 held the most accumulated plant knowledge, has already identified a direction worth moving in. She noticed something yesterday. A certain grass that had been disturbed, a specific beetle species that only appears near a certain type of tuber. You didn't notice any of that. The group moves. You keep pace, but barely. Your feet are wrong. You're watching the ground directly in front of you instead of scanning the middle distance the way everyone else does. A habit so ingrained in experienced foragers that they can spot a coiled snake at 20 feet while maintaining full conversation. Archaeologist Will Robrooks, whose work on early European Homo sapiens at sites like Schöningen in Germany documented the sophistication of prehistoric hunting strategies, has argued that the cognitive load of this life, tracking, remembering, anticipating, navigating, was equivalent to managing a complex modern professional role. Except the stakes of a bad decision were immediate and physical. You reach a digging site. The women begin extracting tubers, mongongo roots, or some substance similar, with a sharpened digging stick. This requires knowing exactly how deep to dig, how to tell the ripe ones from the unripe, and how to carry what you find without crushing it. You try. The roots break wrong in your hands. You're doing it incorrectly. Someone corrects you, not unkindly, but the correction is noted. Meanwhile, two of the men have been reading tracks in the soft soil near a dried creek bed. One of them, who has been doing this since he was 7 years old, identifies the gait of a gemsbok, a large antelope, from a set of prints in the sand. He knows it was moving fast. He knows it stopped here. He knows roughly where it went. This is persistence hunting, the technique researchers like Louis Liebenberg have documented extensively among the sand peoples of southern Africa, running prey to exhaustion across miles of open terrain by reading its tracks and anticipating its route. Liebenberg published detailed accounts of this practice in the 1990s, describing how hunters had to model the animal's mental state, when it was confused, when it was tiring, when it would try to double back. You cannot do this. Not yet. Possibly, not ever without years of practice. Now here is the counterintuitive part, the part that might reframe everything you assumed about this life. The people doing all of this were not miserable. The sand people studied by Richard Lee in his foundational 1963 fieldwork in the Kalahari, work that fundamentally shifted how anthropologists understood early human economies, were found to meet their caloric needs in roughly 12 to 19 hours of foraging per week. Not per day, per week. The rest of the time was spent resting, talking, making music, telling stories, and sleeping. Lee described a quality of social leisure that modern industrial societies rarely achieve. Suzman, returning to the same communities decades later, noted that despite the material poverty that colonization had introduced, the older community members who still remembered traditional life described it as deeply satisfying in ways that modern consumer culture wasn't. The work was hard, but it was comprehensible. You knew what you needed to do. You knew how to do it. If you'd been raised into it, and you did it, and then it was done. There was no inbox. There was no abstract future debt. There was the fire, and the food, and the people you loved. The problem isn't that the life was cruel. The problem is that you don't belong to it. Not because you're weak. Not because modern humans are somehow degraded or inferior. But because belonging to that life required a childhood's worth of accumulated knowledge, a body trained from infancy for specific terrain, and a web of relationships built on years of demonstrated reciprocity. You would fail not from a lack of courage, but from a lack of context. And here is what makes that worth sitting with. Every skill those people had, every piece of ecological knowledge, every social protocol, every physical capacity, was real intelligence, earned intelligence, passed down across generations by people paying close attention to a world that demanded they pay attention. The Blombos Cave archaeological site in South Africa, dated to roughly 100,000 years ago, shows evidence of ochre processing, symbolic engraving, and organized tool production. Proof that your ancestors were cognitively sophisticated long before the first city, long before the first written word. They weren't primitive. They were specialized. In a world where your specialization is now something completely different, screens, abstractions, systems, theirs was the body and the land. So when you wake up tomorrow morning, in your bed, in your house, with water available at the turn of a handle, know that the comfort is real. But know also that somewhere underneath it, your body still carries the faint architecture of a different life. The capacity for endurance, the instinct for pattern recognition, the deep need for a small group of people who know you and on whom you can genuinely depend. You wouldn't last a week, but the part of you that almost could, that part is still there.